Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope you are doing well. We have a really interesting day in the markets today, which is Tuesday, October 15th. Bitcoin currently is at 66,300. We were close to 68,000 at one point, and then all of a sudden I went to get coffee, came back, and we were 65,000. Now we've recovered to 66,000. I'll tell you why that happened in a minute. Looking at the broader market indexes, Dow Jones is down 0.29%, Nasdaq is down 1.12%, S&P is down 0.3%, and the Russell 2000 is up close to 1%. Dollar index is unchanged, and the VIX is up 2.44%. That's the volatility index. Now, as it relates to volatility and things that are making investors think about what's going on in the markets, there's really three things here. If I'm going to summarize the macroeconomic uncertainty or sources of uncertainty, the first thing we have is the monetary policy, and we've spoken extensively about that on this channel. There's a more than likely chance that the market is pricing in that we get a 50 basis point cut by the end of the year, and probably around a 100 basis point cut next year. The second source of uncertainty is the 2024 election, which is now less than 1 month away. And it does seem like Trump is pulling away here, 57.7%. At one point, they were basically neck and neck, and they were neck and neck for a long period of time. It does seem Trump is pulling away here. I wonder what the cause of this is. It doesn't seem like there was a certain event that caused Harris to lose favor so dramatically. I think perhaps the more people got to know her, the more they figured out that she, as I described before, she's just an empty vessel floating around that is willing to say and do pretty much anything she is told to say. I think people got that impression from her after hearing her speak and really can't find any redeemable qualities about her. And perhaps this is impacting her poll numbers. We'll have to wait and see what happens, though. It's not over until it is over, as they say. And the third thing that is casting its shadow on the markets and causing uncertainty is the tensions in the Middle East. And also, I would say the tensions in Taiwan, between China and Taiwan. Wa alaikum salam, Chocolate. Nice to see you. As it relates to Israel and Iran, it does seem like, so exactly like I said last time Iran hit Israel with those empty ballistic missiles, I said this is just going to be a vaccine because Israel now knows more about what to expect from Iran, and it can take the proper precautions. So the U.S. sent anti-missile systems to Israel that should help it in the case that Iran retaliates after the Israeli strike. And I'm assuming that once this anti-missile system is operational and tested, that the Israeli strike will soon follow. So the Pentagon said, this was updated 4 hours ago, Pentagon said components for an advanced anti-missile system began arriving in Israel on Monday, and that it would be fully operational in the near future, according to a statement on Tuesday. Over the coming days, additional U.S. military personnel and THAAD battery components will continue to arrive in Israel. The battery will be fully operational, capable in the near future. But for operation security reasons, we will not discuss timelines. Yeah, they're not going to tell you timelines because the Israeli strike will probably be soon after it's fully operational. So these are the three components of uncertainty in the market. That being said, the general trend here is bullish. I think after we get through this and after we get through the elections, and perhaps if we have additional encouraging economic data points that provide more clarity, the road ahead is very bullish, at least till the end of the year and probably Q1 2025. That being said, we're not going to take anything for granted, and we'll be keeping a very close eye on everything as it develops. So, taking a look at the movers today, we have Apple is up. Look at this block here, semiconductors, basically all in the red, as is energy. Semiconductors are in the red for a number of reasons. One of them, ASML, reported softer guidance ahead of its earnings. ASML is down close to 15%. And in sympathy, a lot of other semiconductor companies, semiconductor industry related companies fell as well. You can see Nvidia is down 5% today. Looking at some other names here, so Bitdeer is down 5%. Iris Energy is up 3.5%. Also whipsawed along with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now at 66,500, so recovered somewhat from that dramatic pullback that it experienced. Now, to understand these things and why you shouldn't worry about them, these dramatic movements in asset prices often occur because of derivatives. And so if you look at the open interest chart here, which measures the number of open derivative contracts related to Bitcoin, uh, on the bottom here, you can see that it spiked right before the drop in price. So this red bar here represents a lot of people getting liquidated. And so there was a dramatic drop, well, relatively dramatic drop in the price of Bitcoin. Now that leverage has been washed out of the system, flushed out of the system, the normal price movement resumes again and the re-leveraging process resumes again. So in case you're wondering, what the heck happened here? There was no news and yet we saw this dip. A lot of it has to do with derivatives. Now, I've been asked many times about nuclear and my opinion on nuclear, and it hit my radar again this morning while preparing for this live. So, Oklo is up 16%, and Oklo creates modular nuclear microreactors that are based on fission, not fusion. Fission is less energy needs than fusion. By the way, fission is when you split an atom and there's energy that's released in that process, whereas fusion is where you combine two, I should say, nuclei, when you combine two nuclei. So the difference between splitting an atom and joining two. And the good thing about fission is that it is there's a very high energy output. So it's very good for generating electricity. And there's a lot of need for electricity in the future, whether it's data centers or just the additional electrical components that are in our lives now. Cars, for example, and charging them, high performance computing. So the consensus is that the average consumption of electricity per person is going to increase in the future. And therefore, there's a big need for solutions for generating electricity. One of those solutions is nuclear. And these microreactors make it so that, and the modular microreactors make it so that the parts can be manufactured and then assembled on site. And so the uptime, the costs are reduced substantially. So let's take a look at. I always like before I look into a company. By the way, the reason why it was up today, Oklo was up, is because well, something. First, it got approval for one of its designs for the for its nuclear power solution. Also, Google got into the nuclear game in order to power its planned data centers. And it got into the game by investing in Kairos Power. And actually, they did a deal with them. So, privately held Kairos Power reported Monday that it has signed a development agreement with Alphabet's Google. The famous tech company and the nuclear power solutions provider are teaming up to establish a set of nuclear energy projects totaling 500 megawatts of power. These should be deployed by 2035, according to Kairos. So, Kairos is privately held, so it doesn't have a public stock that we can follow, but there are some public nuclear stocks that rallied today. I told you about Oklo, and another one is NuScale Power. And I'll take a quick look at each one of them. But before we do that, let's listen in and just to, rather than me telling you what the company is about, how about we listen to the CEO and see what he has to say about the company. And this video goes back to when the company went public about 5 months ago. And by the way, this company went public through a SPAC merger with a Sam Altman company. So that, I guess, provides Sam Altman, CEO and soon to be partial owner, minority owner of OpenAI. So that gives it some name recognition, some legitimacy, at least in terms of investors who trust Sam Altman. I'm not sure I'm one of them, but there is some name familiarity there. So let's listen in. Let me know if there's any issues with the sound. Inshallah, there isn't.
Alt-C Acquisition Corp, of which Altman is also the CEO and director. The deal delivering more than $300 million of proceeds to Oklo. With us now, Oklo CEO and co-founder Jacob DeWitt. Jake, great to have you with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So this is all about powering AI?
One piece of it, I think it looks at two factors: powering AI and powering an energy transition that's looking at, reliable, affordable power that nuclear is really well positioned to deliver and at massive scale.
Yeah. How long until you're online?
Yeah, we're aiming to bring our first plant online by about 2027. We've spent a lot. I mean, the company's about 11 years old. A couple years ago, we got a site use permit from the Department of Energy to build our first.
By the way, that's something that really needs to be taken into account. They're going to be online, or at least their plans are to be online in 2027. We're in 2024. So there's a lot of waiting before revenue becomes anything material for this company. And it's very possible that they don't meet their target of 2027 and things take a lot longer. There's a lot of regulatory issues that you can obviously see in a company that's trying to do anything related to nuclear fission. These regulatory hurdles are often, very non-trivial to be able to pass. But I will say that Oklo's strategy of starting in the US is probably the best one, because I think the US is the most understanding when it comes to trying out these new technologies. And actually, at least from amongst other, democratic countries. In terms of, like, if you were to compare us with Europe, well, yeah, you probably would never get anywhere there. In terms of other countries that have tried similar things, in China, there's, I think, 300 nuclear reactors right now. So this is it's being tried. The technology is not necessarily new, but these smaller microreactors, modular microreactors, that is kind of new, and therefore one can expect some delays in the timelines presented.
First plant in Idaho, we were awarded fuel for that plant, which is great. It's actually recycled fuel, which is a big part of what our story can be. And we've got 3 other plants that we've announced, and excited about the backlog that seems to be growing here.
How do you think about public opinion and how much it's changed over the years, and what needs to be done to make it a more accepting backdrop?
Yeah. Being a native New Mexican, born and raised around nuclear technology, I fell in love with it when I was a young kid. So I was always really excited about it. And it's been really neat to see the public at large become more and more accepting, and not just accepting, excited about nuclear. I think one of the big changes that's happened, it sounds silly, but what the internet has enabled for information age, for people to learn about the technology when they dig into it and they hear that it's clean, that it's one of the safest, if not the safest source of energy we have, and that it can produce large amounts of power on a decarbonization basis, as well as do it 24/7. People get excited about it, and I think it's growing considerably.
What's the half-life of the memory of a Chernobyl or a Fukushima, right?
Yeah, I think it's shortening radically.
So here they're mentioning that the pre-money equity value in July for this company was 850 million. Now it's being valued at 1.25 billion. Now, keep in mind, this was a pre-money equity value. They did raise 300 million. So, I mean, basically, it's very close to almost exactly to where it was in terms of market cap and value for the company when it first went public.
Because people go learn the facts about what actually happened and realize, look, at Fukushima was a horrible earthquake and disaster there. But the actual nuclear event, while bad, was not nearly as catastrophic from a human life perspective. And now we're learning, like, hey, a lot of these next generation systems have all these mitigating features where you put the physics of the design in the system to make it self-stabilizing, self-cooling. So it's kind of a physics-based safety approach. You don't need external things to do it. And it's great because it's not just talk. This has been done before. Mm-hmm. So the technology we're specifically building off of, some of these other advanced reactor technologies build off of, has actually been demonstrated these safety characteristics in the real world, which is phenomenal.
Is your focus mostly in the United States or Europe as well? I mean, what we learned from Russia, Ukraine is that there is a need for power, that there's a need for diversity of power, and they're actually trying to unmothball plants over there and turn them back on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about nuclear is you load it up with fuel, and most of these plants are going to run for a year plus. In our case, we aim for 10 years before you have to refuel. Talk about a lot of energy security. Once you load that asset with fuel, you don't have to have a constant supply of it. But we're starting in the U.S. We see that as unlocking the rest of the world, given that the U.S. is kind of the flagship entity, especially on the regulatory front.
That's a big thing. If you can load a power generation plant with fuel one time and then you don't have to fuel it again for the next 12, 18 months and sometimes 10 years. That's a big advantage that nuclear power plants have compared to other sources of energy.
But we're very excited about what bringing this broadly can look like, not just from U.S. sort of export perspectives, but also geopolitical stability and security on a global basis.
I wonder, too, what the Europeans offer in the way of cautionary tales. A lot of discussion a couple of years ago when the Ukraine war started was what if they hadn't turned their back so forcefully on some technologies, right?
Absolutely. I mean, look what Germany's done. I think there's this example case study of kind of what not to do. I think you see California following that, not facing the same geopolitical threats, but realizing for climate goals, nuclear is critically important, keeping that plant open. I think we're just at the beginning of a really exciting.
Yeah, and if you're a fan of the environment and things that help save the environment, and I think as Halal-conscious investors we probably should be, then nuclear is actually very clean. There's one drawback to fission, which is that there is nuclear waste as a byproduct of that process. That being said, there are increasingly sort of innovative approaches that have been proposed. One obvious approach, as the cost of space flight decreases would be just to shoot the nuclear waste into space. I think that's something that could possibly happen in the future, and that would get rid of that pretty big problem that this industry has had to deal with for a long time.
Exciting era where you're going to see a lot more of what nuclear has to bring to bear. Remember, this technology, while kind of old, is not. I mean, it's only really 80 years old since we've known how to kind of manage it. It's very early in technology development. So I feel very optimistic that we're just at the beginning of a really exciting era here.
How do you think about demand coming from areas XAI?
By the way, something that is, I think, noteworthy about this stock and would be one of the big pros of the stock is that the founder is the CEO, and the founder owns a very big chunk of the company. I think close to 10%. So typically, founder-led companies have better returns than non-founder-led companies.
Is that also as dire as it appears to be when we talk about the grid?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And this is what's interesting. And so we focus on a different business model where we're not trying to design the reactors and push them off onto people to do all the work to design, build, own, operate themselves. That's kind of the typical model nuclear's done. We instead do an all-in-one solution where we design, build, own, operate, and sell power through a long-term power purchase agreement. We see the market really likes this, right? AWS's deal is a data center example, signing a PPA with Talon, a good example of this. But we see others. In fact, we announced a partnership with Diamondback Energy, driving electrification of their operations in the Permian. And that's just the beginning of a huge amount of opportunity for broad electrification and the energy transition. We're really focused on making nuclear pretty, well, let me phrase that, a lot easier to buy, if that makes sense.
All right, so that's an overview from the CEO. So it's not going to be online until 2027. The concept is a solid one. I think the technology is probably where it needs to be. The stock is up today close to 24%. Let me show you guys. So there's a lot going for it, but is it a buy at this price? Well, it's important to, I think, keep ourselves grounded in financials. Now, obviously, they don't have any revenue. None of their sites are online yet. They have, let's see what their cash balance versus their cash burn is, just to see how much runway they have. So they actually raised money from financing in the latest quarter, 265 million. They've invested Capex, 188 million. So, assuming that same run rate, it would require a lot of Capex if we assume that, last quarter was not an aberration, an exception in terms of cash needed for investing in Capex. So that's close to 800 million a year if you annualize that number. Cash from operations is negative 10 million. I'm not sure, how much you can take from that because there really isn't any operations, so to speak, because they're not up and running yet. There's Capex, investment in Capex, and perhaps this is the cash from operations is research and development expense and some administrative expense. But we're seeing, if we just take the cash from operations and cash from investing, that's negative 200 million. Now, they did raise 265 million, so they had a net change in cash that was positive. And if you look at the cash that they have in total, it's 235 million. So not a lot of cash considering how much they invested and lost last quarter, and the fact that they're not going to be generating revenue until 2027 at the earliest, may I add, because these timelines can change a lot, especially with a novel idea like microreactors. So given this, if we look at, for example, the price to book, which is not my favorite valuation technique to look at, but in absence of any revenue and any income, it's hard to find other reasonable valuation metrics to use. And also in absence of a solid way to forecast what are the economics of these micro reactors, because we don't really know how much a micro reactor is going to cost. Maybe it costs, I've seen estimates of anywhere between 100 and 300 million. Let's assume it's closer to 300 million, and maybe profit from every location between 25 and 50 million a year. So it's going to take you at least 6 years to pay off the investment that you made in the micro reactor. And that's if, everything goes pretty well. And so this is a very high capex, longer term horizon investment. And I think stockholders should have the same view of it, which is that it may work out very well, it may not, but it's currently being valued at 1.25 billion, and there's no revenue, there's no income. There's deals in place, there's movement for sure. I think they'll do well, but it's going to take a lot of waiting, I think, for this to play out. And there's going to be a lot of ups and downs on the way. And I'm not sure that this is something I necessarily want to pay the opportunity cost for. If I put $1 here, I can't put it anywhere else. And so, given I can't see a near-term catalyst, this is a pass for me. Although, it will stay on the watch list. I'm convinced with the logic behind this approach. I'm convinced that we need electricity. I'm convinced that fission is a good solution to that. I'm convinced that the safety concerns are probably overblown and can be mitigated in a big way. It's just the timeline is a tough one to deal with. You're talking, revenue in at earliest 3 years. That being said, something that is definitely going for it, aside from I think being in the right business and having the right approach generally to this problem, as I mentioned, the insider ownership is high. The CEO is the founder, and he's a subject matter expert. He knows what he's talking about. He's not just the bean counter. He understands the physics. This is a big, big plus for this company. Insider ownership, here it says 43%. I saw it reported differently in a different place. I think it was 20% in that other source, but it's high. And so that's great. And what's great as well is that insider transactions here, we can see that the insiders are not selling, they're holding. So that's fantastic. It's not as good as insiders buying, but it is good that they're not selling. And so there's belief in the company. Now, short float, I can understand this too, is 12%, which is high. It's not the highest I've seen, but it is high. Anything above 10% for the percentage of float that is being shorted is considered high. So I expect a lot of volatility in this name and a lot of waiting that investors will have to do, and so I'll skip. That being said, they're in a lot better shape, I think, a lot more attractive investment than something like NuScale, for example, which is up, by the way, 144% in the last year, and it's up 3% today. But NuScale has a market cap of close to 3.5 billion, and their revenue is less than $1 million in the last quarter. If we look at their cash situation, they have 130 million in cash, and they spent 195,000 on investing, not necessarily, so let's assume that's nothing. Cash from operations is negative 36 million. So they're not doing the Capex, but they have operations that are using up 36 million. Anytime you have cash from operations at negative 36 million and revenue at less than a million, you kind of lost me. And their net change in cash is negative 1 million. Their free cash flow is negative 50 million. Their cash, again, their cash in short term investments is 130 million. So these folks are going to have to raise money and probably going to dilute shareholders. So this is another company that I wouldn't touch. And well, this is a company that I wouldn't touch. Oklo it's closer to being considered, but this is something I wouldn't touch. And if you look at insider ownership here for this company, insider ownership is 15% less than Oklo, but also insider transactions, negative 3.22%. So you have some insiders that are selling. Oftentimes, selling can be noise. Yes, this is true, but sometimes it isn't. And also, with regards to the shorts outstanding, talking 27% of all available shares are being shorted. So I think investors should look out below on that name, because any piece of bad news could really pull the rug out from under this stock. I think it's way too richly valued here. Considering the hurdles that are involved in its industry, considered how early we are, considering how much revenue it's generating, I cannot justify that type of valuation for that company. And this is why we invest, because I do think that the market is often inefficient and it misallocates capital. And there are money making opportunities when that happens. By the way, if I forgot to remind you, please leave a like. Would really appreciate that. Share this with your friends, your colleagues, anyone who you want to make money, and become a PIF member if you haven't already, to follow our portfolios. Link to do so is in the description. With that, let me take some questions. Do you still see BTC going to 100K in this quarter? Obviously, as less and less of the quarter is remaining, that probability becomes lower and lower, but I still think that, inshallah, it will happen. At least I will say I still think there's an above 50% probability that will happen, as crazy as that may seem. What can we expect if the war situation escalates? Personally, I think not much. I think there'll initially be panic in the market, but it will recover. At least that's how it's played out as of late. Great. Hey, assalamu alaikum, Rashad. Nice to see you. I'm not sure about having a nuclear site in my backyard in a few years. Yeah, I can see that. And, that's one of the reasons why, nuclear after Fukushima and Chernobyl, obviously, nuclear has had a bad reputation. It's associated with disasters. But I do think, on a probability basis, and considering, the new advancements in technology and the mitigation efforts and the new designs, that perhaps this risk is overblown and perhaps the reputation is no longer warranted for being, an ultra risky way of generating power. I'm glad you liked the live, Rashad. Dr. Baus says, Assalamu alaikum. Alaikum assalam. With Bittier and volatility, how long will it be when we see a 3 to 5x return? There's no telling whether we will see a 3 to 5x return or when it will happen. I have to always caveat this. I don't want people to think that, the future is certain in any way. It's not. Investing is a fundamentally uncertain exercise. But there are probabilities, and I think that Bitdeer is a good name to hold. Obviously, I hold it. When it will pan out, it's tough to say, but I think it will probably do very well as Bitcoin does well. And if you look at recent activity in Bitcoin, it's rather encouraging. By the way, an article that I wanted to show you guys that I did not show you guys. Yesterday, US spot Bitcoin ETFs saw 556 million, $500 million in inflows in the biggest day since June. So, if you ignore the derivative noise and look at the signal, which is the actual buying of the actual asset, buying or selling of the actual asset, well, it's quite bullish if you look at what people are saying. So 11 ETFs saw aggregate net inflows. So this is net inflows of 555 million on October 14th, which was yesterday, their largest daily net inflow since early June. And Bitcoin hit a 2-week high of 66.5. ETF store president Nate Gerasi called it a monster day for spot BTC ETFs, adding that they were now approaching 20 billion in net inflows over the past 10 months. Simply ridiculous and blows away every pre-launch demand estimate. This is not degen retail, it's advisors and institutional investors continuing to slowly adopt. This is very important. And if we want to put this inflow in context, gold has hit a record high 30 times this year, but gold ETFs have only seen 1.4 billion net inflows compared with more than 19 billion for Bitcoin ETFs. So the fundamentals of this asset, or Bitcoin that is, are quite strong. I think this strength will translate to miners of this asset, Bitdeer being one of them. It's going to take some patience, and it's going to take some stomaching of a lot of volatility, but hopefully, inshallah, we're getting more and more used to it as we become more and more experienced investors. And really, I'm seeing the development and just the quality of conversation that we're getting in our PIF Discord lounge. It seems like, investors, alhamdulillah, are really maturing in terms of how they deal with fluctuations in price for different assets, and they typically have the right attitude where it's like buy when things are down, thinking of selling when things are up, rotating between different assets. It's really awesome to see, to be honest. So yeah, I'm optimistic not just about Bitdeer, but I'm optimistic about the chances of our halal-conscious community to achieve what I wanted to achieve, which is at least 1,000 members becoming millionaires. That's what I would like to see, inshallah. And if we can have a small role in that, I think that will be very fulfilling for me. Thanks, Abdul, for always reminding everyone to like the live. By the way, I've seen other YouTubers have mods in their chat. I'm not sure our chat necessarily needs moderators, but if you'd like to be a mod, then reach out to me, and yeah, we'll make you a mod, inshallah. I don't know, maybe I'll make like 1 or 2 people mods, and we can get the conversation going in the chat. M. Khan says, Assalamu alaikum. Do we expect BTU to go up until the end of the year? Do we expect it? Well, there'll be a lot of volatility. It's not going to be a straight line, but I think at the end of the year, it'll be higher than it is today. Where exactly it'll be? I think there's a strong probability of it breaking its all-time highs by the end of the year. I think that's a strong probability, actually. And in fact, obviously a lot depends on how the geopolitical situation pans out. There's now talk that perhaps there's going to be a blockade that China imposes on Taiwan, perhaps not an invasion, but a blockade. How that translates into overall markets, it's tough to say. But, absent geopolitical risks, I think there's a high likelihood of it breaking its all-time highs. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this live. I enjoyed speaking with you today, as I do every time I do these lives. If you enjoyed this live, leave a like, hit the notification bell so you know when we go live next. Become a PIF member if you're not a member already. And until next time, make sure to take care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you all.